research and policy. First of all, I want to share that Professor Sharma's life and the values that he believes in, his entire life is an inspiration, and today that we are celebrating his life, his entire, the aura that he emanates. It's a pleasure to be here under his aura, and I am extremely privileged to share today a very interesting and different aspect to TRIPS, which is while we were talking about a lot of innovations in different spheres, in different scientific domains, what is important to understand is where does India stand when we are talking about innovations. We know that today it's the technology age, the technology decade, and we are looking forward towards Viksit Bharat 2047. It is very important for us to have a standing globally and have our science and technology innovation ecosystem very empowered in the global ecosystem. And today I'm going to touch upon some international benchmarks from different frameworks that is taken by different prominent organizations worldwide, and how those insights can be taken globally into our Indian ecosystem so that we can have a way to measure the innovations that are being created and that has been discussed the past 3 days. So it is very important to have some kind of measurable metrics to evaluate the innovations that are being created. Currently, India's ranking in Global Innovation Index, which is a very prominent framework, is 39th, and Industry Academia Collaborations, India's ranking is 86th, and the SDG Goal Index means the amount of SDG goals that we have been successful in achieving. We lie on just short of 100, this is 99, which is very poor. And so that's why we need to have some kind of an assessment criteria for technology to evaluate its potential and financial viability of the innovation. We all talk about TRLs, right? The technology readiness levels. This was one of the earliest frameworks that was developed to evaluate technology, and it was developed by NASA, which was based on the innovation life cycle. So the benefits, we know how TRLs are decided, TRL 1 to 9, and it is in an iterative cycle, but it also has several drawbacks. For example, whenever there is any disruptive nature of technology, it is not being considered. And also market demand, cost effectiveness, and regulatory compliances are not considered under TRLs. Though we talk about scientific research as basic and translational research, but there is a quadrant model of scientific research where we are talking about fundamental research and why it needs to be done, and also how that technology or any kind of innovation that emanates from basic science can be used. And that is how it is divided into Bohr, Pasteur, and Edison quadrant. While we are talking about measuring and having some measurable matrix to innovation, input that is there, which is beyond your funding. Input just doesn't mean that we are having funding, but there has to be an output which is again beyond publications and patents, and the outcomes and the impact that is created out of innovation must be measured. For example, the economic impact and the innovation's contribution to the GDP of the country, which should be taken into account, the environmental impact and sustainability, social impact, and the kind of social addition and the challenges that is being addressed by the innovations needs to be taken into consideration. And it's also important that the interdisciplinary approaches, how that can be included to capture knowledge creation and flows. So this is just an overview of the Global Innovation Index, which is one of the most prominent indices to measure innovation. And as you can see, I was talking about the input and the output. The input is not just dependent on funding, but there has to be a political environment, which is the political will of the government should be there. How much of investment goes into education, skilling, and uplifting of and training of individuals, the infrastructure support that is provided, market, how the market is being engaged and prepared for the upcoming innovation, and the business part of it. And we also look into the output, which is beyond your patents and publications, and it is not just about knowledge creation but also intangible assets like trademarks and other creative aspects of evaluating innovations. There's another S-curve framework where we are looking into technology and the iterative processes where there can be a pilot, an early adopter, then some increase in tech adoption, and finally a large-scale increase in the technology productivity. There are some additional factors which needs to be taken into consideration. For example, when we are scaling a technology from the lab to a large scale, several challenges come into the existing processes and how that can be embraced, how the entire ecosystem, including the industry, the government can come in to prepare that performance. Is there any measuring per unit technology performance, and how the technology can be evolved into the next level. This is one very interesting framework that I would like to share with you about DARPA. So you must have heard that DARPA is one of the earliest frameworks which was developed by US, and it was by the Ministry of Defense in the US. Its previous version was ARPA, from which ARPANET was created. ARPANET is a previous version of Internet. So it's only because of extensive and intense investment by DARPA that we have Internet today. And one of the major factors of the success of DARPA as compared to NSF, which is National Science Foundation and funds a lot of basic science, DARPA focuses a lot on technology development, and one of the major aspects of it is its evaluation and accountability, which is intense monitoring, milestone-based, and rapid iteration, which is very much required to incorporate into our Indian ecosystem as well. Another of the innovation policies, which is by OECD for Korea, and why we are taking Korea, because it has the world's highest innovation inputs. Of course, it also 4.63% of its GDP is also put into the research ecosystem, and it is trying to look into how a national vision. It is not just about creating specific missions, but a national vision for the country is being considered in terms of science and technology and how it can address societal challenges. And it also focuses on internationalizing its science, technology, innovation. And because it is important to spread the knowledge that is happening within the country to world abroad, and also inviting people from across the globe into the country to conduct research. And how these technologies can also be taken up by industries and MSMEs, so MSMEs also need to be looped in. I will just quickly take you through this innovation diffusion, which is by OECD. So in this, what they are basically focusing on, that while innovations are being made, what is important is how it can be diffused into the entire ecosystem to the last mile. And that is where it talks about various diffusion channels, which is beyond academic and industry collaborations, and there has to be how various supply chains can be created, and these processes can be taken forward, so that while these innovations are being designed or initiated, along with that, a commercialization process also needs to be parallelly started, so that there is not a delay that first of all TRL 1 to 5 will happen, then people will think about taking it from 5 to 9 and then further commercialization. Things should start parallelly, so that from when the scientist is working on the innovation, parallelly the commercialization prospects and taking it on the ground to the last mile, so that overall our global innovation index ranking starts reaching to the higher levels. And few aspects of, we need to focus on blended finance, which is I think a term that you must have heard in COP29, COP28, where blended finance has been focused a lot. And in blended finance, they talk about how public and philanthropic funds can be used to bring in private investment. As I was talking about DARPA, a very strong monitoring and evaluation framework of innovations is required. And finally, I will leave you to this food for thought as to, it's not just about revolutionizing a market or a particular field of science, but going into very specific details of that innovation and thinking what core improvements might drive value, what dimension currently causes the most friction of our users, and then trying to solve them, where are we leaving value on the table, what small improvements could compound into significant user benefits, and finally how might improvements in one dimension enable improvements in others. Thank you so much.